I sit in my car with the engine off, watching through glass that might as well be a television screen. The restaurant glows amber under its pendant lights, and inside, Elliot leans forward across our table, his laugh spilling out in a way that makes his eyes crinkle at the corners. The warmth reaches me even through the window, even through the distance I have placed between us. My hands rest on the steering wheel, but I cannot remember walking out here. I cannot remember excusing myself or saying I needed air. One moment I was sitting across from him, watching him gesture as he told some story about his students, and the next I was out here in the cold, staring back at the life I am supposed to be living. He does not look toward the window. He does not see me watching, does not see the way I have frozen between staying and leaving. His face is open, expectant, probably wondering where I have gone and when I will return. The kindness in his expression makes something twist in my chest, but it is not Elliot I am thinking about. It is Nathaniel, always Nathaniel, his voice cutting through the months like a blade through paper. I don't love you. For words delivered without ceremony, without apology, as if he were commenting on the weather. The memory sits in my throat like a stone I cannot swallow. What haunts me is not just what he said, but what came after. 3 days later, he appeared at my door with that look he gets when he wants something but will not name it. "Where have you been?" he asked. "Who were you with? Why didn't you call?" His voice carried an edge I had never heard before, something raw and possessive that contradicted everything he had just finished telling me about not loving me. The jealousy was unmistakable. It lived in the way his jaw tightened when I mentioned other people, in the way his questions came too quickly, in the way he stood too close in my doorway, as if he could block out the rest of the world just by being there. But jealousy without love is a poison that feeds on itself, and I had spent too many years watching him swallow it. Inside the restaurant, Elliot checks his phone, probably wondering if I am coming back. His fingers drum against the table in a patient rhythm. He is not the kind of person who demands explanations or gets angry when someone needs a moment. He simply waits, trusting that I will return when I am ready. I press my palms against the steering wheel and try to remember how to breathe. The contradiction of Nathaniel lives in my body like a splinter I cannot remove. How do you love someone who cannot love you back, but cannot let you go either? How do you build a life on that foundation, and how do you leave it behind? My phone buzzes against my leg. A text from Nathaniel, as if he knows I am thinking about him, as if he can sense the exact moment when I might be moving towards something new. The timing feels calculated, cruel in its precision. I do not look at the message. I do not want to know what he needs tonight, what emergency or casual cruelty has prompted him to reach across the silence. Through the window, Elliot glances up and our eyes meet. He smiles, a small wave of recognition, and I realize I have been sitting here long enough for him to notice. Long enough for the waiter to probably ask if everything is all right. Long enough for my absence to become a presence of its own. I know I have to choose. I know I cannot sit in this car forever, suspended between the life I have been living and the one that might be waiting for me inside. But the weight of that choice feels impossible, like trying to lift something that has been buried too deep for too long. Elliot raises his hand, a gentle gesture that says come back when you are ready. Not demanding, not impatient. Just an invitation extended across the space between us. And for the first time in months, I think I might be. My apartment sits on the edge of the city where the buildings thin out and give way to older neighborhoods with wide porches and trees that arch over the streets. It is a deliberate choice, this distance from the center of things. Close enough to reach when I need to, far enough away to breathe when I do not. The walls are covered with my photographs, images I have collected over the years like evidence of a life lived at the margins. Empty streets at dawn, landscapes that stretch beyond the frame, the backs of strangers walking away from the camera. There is something honest about photographing people in departure, catching them in the moment before they disappear completely. It feels more truthful than asking them to turn around and smile. I work as a graphic designer, mostly for small businesses that need logos or websites or the kind of clean, unremarkable marketing materials that help them blend into the background of commerce. The work pays well enough and allows me to keep irregular hours, often staying up until 3 or 4 in the morning, the glow of the computer screen the only light in the apartment. There is a peace in working while the rest of the world sleeps, a sense that I am moving through time at my own pace. At 37, I have built a life that operates like clockwork. I cook dinner for one at the same time each evening, usually something simple that does not require much attention. I read for an hour before bed, always fiction, always stories about people making choices I have never had the courage to make. On weekends, I walk through the park that borders my neighborhood, taking pictures of the way light falls through the trees or the patterns that joggers make as they circle the paths. It is an orderly life, carefully constructed to minimize surprises. But loneliness has a way of seeping through even the most carefully sealed spaces, and there are evenings when the silence becomes so complete that I can hear my own heartbeat echoing off the walls. This was not always my life. There was a time when my days revolved around someone else, when my plans were shaped by the possibility of his presence or the certainty of his absence. Nathaniel entered my world gradually, the way water finds its way into the smallest cracks. We met at a gallery opening, both of us standing awkwardly near the wine table, both of us looking like we would rather be anywhere else. He was beautiful in the way that certain men are at 35, all sharp edges and careful distances, as if he had learned early that letting people too close was a mistake he could not afford to make twice. We talked about the paintings, about the way the artist used color to suggest longing, and I found myself drawn to the careful way he chose his words, as if each one had been weighed before being spoken. What began as friendship deepened into something we never named. Nathaniel was allergic to labels, to the weight of expectation that came with calling something what it was. We spent evenings together, sometimes in silence, sometimes talking until the sun came up. I learned the way he took his coffee, the books that lined his shelves, the particular quality of light that made him look most like himself. But intimacy was something he rationed, doling it out in small doses as if he were afraid of running out. There were nights when he would reach for me with a hunger that felt desperate, and others when he would retreat so completely that I wondered if I had imagined the closeness between us. I told myself that this was simply who he was, that love could exist in the spaces between approach and withdrawal. I stayed because the fragments of affection felt like enough, because the alternative was admitting that I had been wrong about what we were building together. I stayed through the canceled plans and the unanswered calls, through the way he would disappear for days and then return as if no time had passed at all. I stayed because I believed that patience was a form of love, and that if I waited long enough, he would find his way to me completely. Until the evening when he finally said what I had been afraid to hear. "I don't love you." The words arrived without warning, spoken in the same tone he might use to decline an invitation to dinner. We were sitting on my couch, and he delivered this verdict as if it were a simple statement of fact rather than the end of everything I had been hoping for. The months since have been an exercise in learning how to live beyond those 4 words. I have redesigned my routines to exclude the possibility of his presence, rearranged my furniture so that nothing holds the memory of him sitting there. I have tried to make peace with cooking for one, with weekends that stretch unbroken from Friday evening to Monday morning. But Nathaniel exists in the spaces I cannot control. He lives in the song that comes on the radio while I am driving, in the book I see in a store window that I know he would find interesting, in the way certain strangers walk down the street with that same careful distance he carried everywhere. The silence of my life is never fully silent because he has left echoes that I cannot erase. Even now, sitting in this car outside the restaurant where Elliot waits for me to return, I can feel Nathaniel's presence like a weight I carry in my chest. The contradiction of him, the way he could not love me, but could not bear to let me love anyone else. It is a riddle I have never solved, a pattern I have never managed to break free from. Until tonight, perhaps. Until this moment when I must choose between the familiar ache of what I have always known and the terrifying possibility of what I have never dared to reach for. The invitation comes from Rebecca, a colleague who has been trying to draw me into the social rituals of our small design firm for months. She corners me by the coffee machine on a Tuesday afternoon, her enthusiasm cutting through my usual deflections like sunlight through fog. "There is a group dinner planned for Friday," she says. "Just a few people from work and some friends. Nothing fancy, but it would be good for me to get out." I find myself saying yes before I have fully processed the question. The word escapes my mouth as if it has been waiting there, ready to betray my carefully maintained isolation. Rebecca smiles with the satisfaction of someone who has finally solved a puzzle she has been working on for too long. Friday evening finds me standing outside a small restaurant downtown, checking my phone for the third time to make sure I have the right address. The idea of spending an evening making conversation with strangers feels like trying on clothes that no longer fit, but I have committed to this, and backing out now would require explanations I am not prepared to give. The dinner unfolds exactly as I expected it would. Rebecca introduces me to her friends with the kind of cheerful efficiency that makes me feel like a project she is determined to complete successfully. There is Sarah from her yoga class, Mark who works in marketing, and a few others whose names I collect and immediately forget. The conversation moves through safe topics with practiced ease, everyone taking turns to contribute acceptable observations about their work, their weekend plans, their opinions on the restaurant's menu. But then Rebecca mentions that her friend Elliot will be joining us late, coming directly from a parent-teacher conference at the middle school where he works. When he arrives, 20 minutes after our entrees have been served, something in the atmosphere shifts. He apologizes for being late with a genuineness that suggests he truly regrets missing even a moment of our time together. His presence changes the dynamic of the table in a way that is difficult to name. Elliot is the kind of person who asks follow-up questions, who remembers details from earlier in the conversation and circles back to them with genuine curiosity. When someone mentions a book they are reading, he wants to know what drew them to it. When Mark talks about his weekend hiking plans, Elliot asks about the specific trail, whether it is challenging, what Mark hopes to find there. There is an openness in his attention that feels radical in its simplicity. He turns to me eventually, as I knew he would, and asks about my work. I give him the standard explanation about graphic design, about helping small businesses establish their visual identity, but he does not let me stop there. He wants to know what I enjoy about it, whether I have a favorite type of project, if I do any creative work outside of client demands. His questions are not intrusive, but they require me to think about my answers in ways I have not done in months. I find myself telling him about my photography, about the way I am drawn to capturing moments of departure and transition. He listens with the kind of attention that makes you aware of how rarely you are truly heard. When I mention that I prefer photographing strangers to people I know, he asks why, and I realize I do not have a ready answer. As the evening winds down and we all begin the ritual of dividing the check and gathering our coats, Elliot approaches me with the casual confidence of someone who has already decided what he wants to say. He mentions that there is a film playing at the small independent theater across town, something French and supposedly beautiful, and asks if I might be interested in seeing it with him the following week. The question hangs in the air between us, and I recognize it for what it is. Not just an invitation to see a movie, but an invitation to step outside the careful boundaries I have constructed around my life. The smart thing would be to decline politely, to maintain the distance that has served me so well these past months. But instead, I hear myself saying yes, the same automatic response that brought me to this dinner in the first place. He smiles, an expression of genuine pleasure that makes me wonder when I last said yes to something that might matter. We exchange numbers, make tentative plans for the following Thursday, and I drive home with the strange sensation that I have just agreed to something I do not fully understand. The week passes in its usual rhythm, but with an undercurrent of anticipation that I try not to examine too closely. Thursday arrives with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes everything feel sharper, more defined. I spend longer than usual deciding what to wear, settling finally on clothes that suggest I have made an effort without trying too hard. As I am putting on my jacket, my phone buzzes with a message. Nathaniel's name appears on the screen, and for a moment, I simply stare at it. "What are you doing tonight?" he asks, as if 3 months of silence have not passed between us, as if he has the right to casual curiosity about my evenings. The timing feels deliberate, though I know it cannot be. Nathaniel has no way of knowing about my plans, no reason to reach out tonight rather than any other night. But the coincidence feels loaded with meaning, as if the universe is testing my resolve at the exact moment when I need it most. For the first time since I have known him, I do not respond. I slide the phone into my pocket and leave the apartment, choosing forward motion over the familiar pull of his gravity. The theater is small and dimly lit, with the kind of worn velvet seats that suggest decades of other people's stories unfolding in the darkness. Elliot is waiting in the lobby, reading a program with genuine interest. When he sees me, his face brightens in a way that reminds me what it feels like to be genuinely welcomed into someone's evening. We buy tickets and find seats near the back, and as the lights dim, I realize I have no idea what we are about to watch. The film is indeed French, indeed beautiful, a meditation on memory and loss that unfolds at the pace of real life rather than manufactured drama. Sitting beside Elliot in the darkness, I am aware of his presence in ways that surprise me. The way he leans forward during particularly intense moments, the small sounds of appreciation he makes when the cinematography is especially striking, the warmth that radiates from him in the cool theater. Afterward, we walk slowly to our cars, dissecting the film with the kind of careful analysis that reveals as much about the viewer as about what they have seen. Elliot talks about the director's use of silence, about the way certain shots lingered just long enough to become uncomfortable. I find myself contributing observations I did not know I had, thoughts that emerge only in response to his questions. When we reach my car, he asks if I would like to do this again sometime. Another film, or maybe dinner, or just a walk if the weather holds. The invitation is offered with the same openness that has characterized the entire evening, without pressure or expectation. Simply a door left open for me to walk through if I choose. I say yes again, and this time the word feels intentional rather than automatic. As I drive home, I realize that my phone has been buzzing periodically throughout the evening, but I have not felt compelled to check it. Whatever Nathaniel needed tonight will have to wait until tomorrow, or perhaps longer. For the first time in months, I have chosen to be fully present in my own life, and the sensation is both terrifying and exhilarating. It is only later, as I am getting ready for bed, that I see the series of messages that have accumulated on my phone. Nathaniel's casual question has evolved into something more urgent, more pointed. Where are you, he wants to know. Why aren't you answering? Who are you with? The progression from curiosity to demand reveals something I have never seen so clearly before, a possessiveness that exists independent of love, a claim he has never relinquished despite having nothing to offer in return. The second date happens without the weight of decision that marked the first. Elliot suggests a walk through the botanical gardens on a Saturday afternoon when the light is soft and golden, filtering through the canopy of trees that are just beginning to turn. We move slowly along the paths, stopping to examine the late-blooming flowers, the way shadows fall across the pond where ducks glide in lazy circles. Elliot talks about his students, about the particular challenges of teaching 13-year-olds who are caught between childhood and whatever comes next. There is a tenderness in the way he describes them, an understanding that this age is about becoming rather than being. He asks me about my own adolescence, whether I had teachers who saw me clearly, what I wish someone had told me when I was that age. These are questions Nathaniel never asked. In all our months together, he showed little curiosity about the person I was before I met him, as if my history began the moment I entered his orbit. Elliot seems genuinely interested in the architecture of my life, the experiences that shaped me into the person sitting beside him on a bench overlooking the gardens. I find myself telling him about my parents, about growing up in a house where love was expressed through service rather than words, where my father showed affection by fixing things and my mother demonstrated care through elaborate meals that we ate in comfortable silence. I tell him about discovering photography in high school, about the teacher who saw something in my work that I could not see myself, about the way capturing images helped me understand that there was beauty in moments that most people overlooked. Elliot listens with the kind of attention that makes you forget to guard your words. When I pause, Uncertain whether I have revealed too much, he asks follow-up questions that show he has been truly hearing me rather than simply waiting for his turn to speak. What kind of camera did you start with? He wants to know. Do you still have any of those early photographs? What was it about that teacher that made you trust her judgment about your work? We stay in the gardens until the sun begins to set, talking about books and films and the particular quality of light in this city during autumn. When he walks me to my car, he asks if I would like to have dinner the following week, and I say yes without the hesitation that marked our earlier interactions. But that night, as I am reviewing the photographs I took during our walk, my phone rings. Nathaniel's name appears on the screen, and before I can stop myself, I answer. His voice is carefully neutral, the tone he uses when he wants information but does not want to admit to wanting it. He mentions that he drove past the botanical gardens earlier and thought he saw my car in the parking lot. Was I there today, he asks, and if so, was I alone? The question is posed as casual curiosity, but I can hear the tension beneath his words, the way his breathing changes when he is trying to control something he cannot name. I tell him I was there with a friend, and the silence that follows stretches long enough for me to count my own heartbeats. When he speaks again, his voice has acquired an edge I recognize from our last months together, a sharpness that suggests he is fighting against something that threatens to overwhelm him. A friend, he repeats. Anyone I know. The possessiveness in his tone is unmistakable now, and I realize that whatever claim he believed he had relinquished when he said he did not love me, he has never actually let go. The contradiction lives in every word he speaks, in the careful way he monitors my life while maintaining that he has no stake in it. Over the following weeks, as my evenings with Elliot become a regular rhythm, Nathaniel's presence intensifies rather than fades. He calls with increasing frequency, always with some plausible reason that barely conceals his true purpose. He has found a book he thinks I might enjoy, he says, or he was in my neighborhood and wondered if I wanted to get coffee. When I mention that I am busy, that I have plans, his questions become more pointed. What kind of plans, he wants to know. With whom? Why have my evenings become so unavailable lately? The jealousy is not love, I begin to understand. It is something else entirely, a claim that exists independent of affection or care. Nathaniel does not want me, but he cannot bear the idea of someone else wanting me either. It is a terrible form of ownership, one that demands exclusivity without offering anything in return. Meanwhile, my time with Elliot continues to reveal new dimensions of what it means to be seen by another person. He asks me what makes me feel most at peace, and I realize I have never considered this question seriously. He wants to know about the photographs on my walls, about why I am drawn to images of departure and solitude. When I explain that I find honesty in capturing people who are unaware of being watched, he nods with understanding rather than judgment. One evening, as we sit in his living room after dinner, he asks me about the sadness that he says he sometimes sees in my eyes. The question is offered gently, without pressure, but it catches me off guard in its directness. I tell him about the feeling of loving someone who could not love me back, about the particular loneliness that comes from being kept at a distance by someone who refuses to let you go completely. Elliot listens without trying to fix anything, without offering solutions or reassurances. He simply bears witness to what I am telling him, and in that witnessing, I begin to understand how different this feels from everything I shared with Nathaniel. With Elliot, my pain is acknowledged rather than dismissed, held rather than minimized. But with this new lightness comes an unexpected weight. Guilt presses at the edges of my consciousness, a voice that whispers that I am betraying something sacred by allowing myself to feel joy with someone else. It is irrational, this guilt, since Nathaniel made his position clear months ago. Yet it persists, fed by his constant presence, his ability to make me feel as though I am doing something wrong by moving forward with my life. The transformation happens slowly, so gradually that I do not notice it until I catch my reflection in a store window one afternoon and realize that I look different. Lighter, somehow, as if a weight I have carried for so long has finally begun to lift. I am laughing more, sleeping better, finding pleasure in small things that I had forgotten could bring joy. But Nathaniel's jealousy intensifies in proportion to my growing happiness. He begins showing up unannounced at my apartment, always with some excuse about being in the neighborhood. He mentions things he has heard through mutual friends, casual observations about how I seem different lately, whether everything is all right. The concern in his voice is undermined by the hunger in his eyes, the way he studies me as if searching for evidence of betrayal. One evening, after a particularly intense phone call where Nathaniel questioned me about my weekend plans with barely concealed frustration, I sit alone in my living room and finally allow myself to acknowledge what is happening. I am changing, becoming someone who can accept care without suspicion, who can offer affection without fear of rejection. With Elliot, I am discovering parts of myself that Nathaniel never allowed to emerge. The realization is both liberating and terrifying. For so long, I defined myself in relation to Nathaniel's emotional unavailability, shaped my expectations around his limitations. Learning that I can exist differently, that I can be loved in ways that feel generous rather than conditional, forces me to confront how much of my life I have spent accepting less than I deserved. But understanding this means acknowledging how much time I lost, how many years I spent believing that love was something to be rationed, something that had to be earned through patience and self-diminishment. The anger that follows this realization surprises me with its intensity, a rage that has been building beneath my acceptance for longer than I knew. Yet, even as I begin to question everything I thought I understood about love and worthiness, Nathaniel's presence continues to complicate my forward movement. His jealousy has become a constant hum in the background of my life, a reminder that the past is not finished with me, even if I am trying to be finished with it. The knock comes at 10:30 on a Thursday night, sharp and insistent against my door. I know it is Nathaniel before I look through the peephole, know it from the particular rhythm of his impatience, the way he announces his presence as if he has every right to demand entry into my evening. I consider not answering. I have been reading in bed, letting the day settle around me with the kind of peace I have been learning to cultivate. Tomorrow I will see Elliot again, and the anticipation of that meeting sits warm in my chest like a secret I am finally allowed to keep. But Nathaniel's knocking does not stop, and I know from experience that ignoring him will only make him more determined. When I open the door, he stands there with the restless energy of someone who has been walking the streets for hours, working up the courage for this moment. His hair is disheveled, his jacket pulled tight against the cold, and there is something wild in his eyes that I have seen before, but never this intense. He asks if he can come in, but he is already moving past me into the apartment, as if my consent is a formality rather than a necessity. We sit across from each other in my living room, the coffee table between us serving as both barrier and bridge. For several minutes, neither of us speaks. The silence stretches until it becomes a presence of its own, heavy with everything we have never said to each other, everything we have avoided naming. When he finally speaks, his voice carries an accusation that he tries to disguise as concern. He has been hearing things, he says. People have seen me around town with someone new, someone he does not know. The way he says it makes it sound like a betrayal rather than a natural progression of my life. I tell him that yes, I have been seeing someone, and that it is not really his business who I choose to spend my time with. The words come out more sharply than I intend, but I do not apologize for them. For the first time in our history, I do not try to soften the edges of my truth to make it easier for him to swallow. Nathaniel's reaction is immediate and visceral. His hands clench into fists on his knees, and when he looks at me, there is something desperate in his expression that I have never seen before. He says I am trying too hard to prove something, that this new relationship is just a way of convincing myself that I can move on when we both know I cannot. The condescension in his voice ignites something in me that has been building for months. All the careful politeness I have maintained, all the ways I have protected his feelings while ignoring my own, suddenly feel like elaborate forms of self-betrayal. I ask him the question I have swallowed for too long, the words emerging with a clarity that surprises us both. Why do you care? I want to know. You said you didn't love me. You made that very clear. So why does it matter to you who I see or what I do with my evenings? Why do you get to have an opinion about my happiness when you refuse to be part of it? The question hangs between us like a blade, and I watch as something crumbles in his face. For a moment, he looks young and lost, like the person I first met at that gallery opening years ago, before he learned to armor himself against the possibility of being hurt. The silence that follows is different from the one that opened our conversation. This silence is full of everything he has never allowed himself to say, everything he has kept locked away because naming it would require him to become someone he has never learned how to be. When he finally speaks, his voice is barely above a whisper. His hands are trembling now, and he cannot meet my eyes. He tells me that love terrifies him in ways I cannot understand, that he has never learned how to hold something precious without crushing it. He says he does not know how to be loved, how to become the kind of person who can offer safety rather than uncertainty. But the jealousy, he admits, the anger that consumes him when he thinks of me with someone else, that comes from a place he cannot name, a feeling so intense that it threatens to unmake him completely. He has convinced himself that if he cannot love me properly, then at least he can keep me from being loved properly by anyone else. As I listen to him speak, I begin to understand the terrible arithmetic of our relationship. His feelings for me have existed all along, but twisted into something unrecognizable by his fear of vulnerability. He has loved me in the only way he knows how, by holding me at a distance that felt safe to him, while ensuring that I could never move far enough away to find safety with someone else. It is a revelation that breaks my heart for both of us. For him, because I can see now how much he has suffered in his inability to reach toward what he wanted. For me, because I realize how much of my life I have spent waiting for someone to overcome a fear they were never going to conquer. Love half-lived is no love at all, I understand now. The fragments of affection he offered, the pieces of himself he was willing to share, they were not stepping stones towards something greater. They were the entirety of what he had to give, and no amount of patience on my part was ever going to transform them into the wholeness I deserved. I look at him sitting across from me, this man who has shaped so much of my understanding of what love could be, and I feel something shift inside me that cannot be shifted back. The compassion I feel for him is real, but it no longer comes with the willingness to sacrifice my own happiness for his comfort. He asks me to stay, his voice breaking on the word. He promises to try, to work on becoming someone who can love without fear, someone worthy of what I have always been willing to give. But his promises feel hollow because they are built on the same foundation that has already proven too weak to support what we both needed. For the first time in our history, I do not rush to reassure him. I do not promise to wait or offer my patience as a bridge across his uncertainty. Instead, I sit with the weight of what he has revealed, letting myself feel the full impact of understanding that the love I thought we were building toward has been all we were ever going to have. The revelation changes everything, not because it offers hope, but because it finally allows me to release the hope I have been carrying like a burden for far too long. Love twisted by fear into possessiveness is not love at all. It is something else entirely, something that feeds on the very thing it claims to cherish until nothing remains but the hunger itself. When I look at Nathaniel now, I see clearly for the first time not who he might become with enough patience and understanding, but who he has chosen to remain despite having every opportunity to grow into something more generous. The sadness of this recognition is overwhelming, but beneath it, I can feel something else beginning to emerge, something that feels remarkably like freedom. The days that follow our conversation exist in a strange suspension, as if time itself has paused to allow me to make a decision that will reshape everything. Nathaniel calls every morning, his voice careful and measured, asking how I slept, whether I have given any more thought to what he said. His newfound vulnerability feels both genuine and calculated, as if he has finally learned to weaponize his own pain. He sends flowers to my office on a Tuesday, white roses with a card that says simply, "I'm trying." My colleagues notice and ask questions I cannot answer, their curiosity about this romantic gesture feeling like a spotlight on something I am not ready to examine. I leave the flowers in the break room, unable to bring them home, but unwilling to throw them away. Meanwhile, Elliot continues to exist in my life with the same quiet consistency that has characterized our entire relationship. When I tell him I need some time to sort through complications from my past, he nods with understanding and tells me to take whatever time I need. He does not ask for details or demand explanations. He simply offers his patience as a gift rather than a burden. This difference becomes more pronounced as the week progresses. Nathaniel's attempts to win me back carry an urgency that feels desperate, each gesture designed to prove that he is capable of becoming someone worthy of my love. But there is something performative about his transformation, as if he is trying on the role of devoted partner without understanding what the part requires. Elliot, by contrast, makes no grand gestures or dramatic promises. He sends a single text message asking if I am okay, and when I tell him I need space to think, he responds with a simple acknowledgement and the assurance that he will be here when I am ready. The restraint in his response feels like its own form of love, a willingness to let me choose my own path without pressure or manipulation. I spend sleepless nights walking through my apartment, trying to untangle the complex web of history and hope that has defined my relationship with Nathaniel. I make lists of all the reasons I should stay, all the ways he has finally shown me the vulnerability I have been waiting for. But when I try to imagine a future built on his promises, I can only see myself waiting again, hoping again, settling for glimpses of love rather than demanding its full presence. The memories come in waves during these restless hours. Birthdays that passed unacknowledged, not because he forgot, but because marking them felt too much like making promises he was not ready to keep. Evenings when I suggested dinner out or a weekend trip, only to be met with excuses that were not quite lies, but felt like betrayals nonetheless. The way he would touch me with one hand, while keeping the other pressed firmly against any door that might lead to deeper intimacy. I remember the careful way I learned to edit myself around him, how I stopped mentioning friends he had never met, stopped sharing dreams that required more commitment than he was willing to give. I became fluent in the language of his limitations, translating my needs into requests so small they could not possibly threaten his autonomy. Most painfully, I remember the way I convinced myself that this diminishment was a form of love, that making myself smaller was the same as making room for someone else to grow. I told myself that patience was a virtue, that real love meant accepting someone exactly as they were without asking them to become anything more. But sitting with Elliot over dinners that stretch into the night, talking about books and dreams and the particular quality of light that makes us both want to take photographs, I have begun to understand what it feels like to be loved without conditions or reservations. With him, I do not have to shrink myself to fit into the space he is willing to offer. Instead, he seems genuinely curious about who I am when I am fully myself. On Thursday evening, Nathaniel appears at my door again, but this time he does not push his way inside. He stands in the hallway with his hands in his pockets, looking smaller than I have ever seen him. He tells me he has been seeing a therapist, that he is committed to understanding why intimacy has always felt like a threat rather than a gift. He asks for time, for the chance to prove that people can change when they finally understand what they stand to lose. His plea is heartfelt and desperate, and I can see the genuine fear in his eyes, the recognition that he is asking for something he has never been willing to give. For a moment, I am tempted by the familiar pull of his need. The way his vulnerability makes me want to protect him from his own limitations. But then I think about Elliot, about the way he asks questions that make me examine my own assumptions, about the safety I feel in his presence, the sense that I can reveal myself completely without risk of rejection or judgment. I think about the person I am becoming in that relationship, someone who laughs more easily, who believes she deserves to be cherished rather than merely tolerated. The choice crystallizes with a clarity that surprises me. I cannot build a future on the foundation of someone else's fear, no matter how much they promise to overcome it. I cannot continue to water a garden where nothing has grown despite years of careful tending. I tell Nathaniel that I need time to think, and he nods as if he expected this response. After he leaves, I sit alone in my living room and try to imagine what my life would look like if I chose to wait for him to become someone he has never been. The image that emerges is of myself at 40, at 50, still hoping, still making excuses, still accepting fragments when I deserve the whole. Saturday morning, I call him. My voice is steadier than I expected it to be, clearer than it has been in months. I tell him that I cannot continue in a story that keeps circling the same wound, that keeps promising resolution without ever delivering it. I explain that love should feel like expansion rather than contraction, like possibility rather than limitation. He does not fight me this time. Perhaps he recognizes something final in my tone, or perhaps he is as exhausted as I am by the cycle we have been trapped in for so long. He simply says he understands, his voice hollow with the weight of what we are both releasing. The silence that follows is different from any we have shared before. It is not waiting to be filled with words or explanations or promises. It is complete unto itself, a full stop at the end of a sentence that has taken us years to finish writing. When I hang up the phone, I feel something I have not experienced in longer than I can remember. Not happiness, exactly, but a profound sense of relief, as if I have finally set down a weight I had forgotten I was carrying. The future stretches before me, uncertain but no longer constrained by the patterns that have defined the past. For the first time in years, I am not waiting for someone else to decide what my life will look like. The freedom is both terrifying and exhilarating, a blank page that I can fill with whatever story I choose to write next. 3 weeks have passed since that final phone call, and the world has not ended. This realization comes to me on a Tuesday evening as I sit at my kitchen table, watching Elliot turn the pages of a book he has been reading aloud for the past hour. The late sunlight streams through the window behind him, catching the copper highlights in his hair and casting everything in a warm, golden glow that makes the moment feel suspended in time. We have fallen into this routine without discussing it, this quiet ritual of sharing dinner and letting the evening unfold at its own pace. Tonight we had pasta with vegetables from the farmer's market, simple food prepared without urgency, eaten while we talked about his students and my latest project and the way the changing seasons affect our moods. The conversation flows easily, comfortably, punctuated by comfortable silences that feel full rather than empty. 2 wine glasses sit half-filled between us, the red wine dark as garnets in the fading light. It is a small detail, these glasses, but somehow it carries the weight of everything that has changed. For so long, I prepared dinner for one, read alone, went to bed with only my own thoughts for company. Now there are 2 plates in the sink, 2 voices filling the space, 2 people choosing to be present with each other without reservation or fear. Elliot reads with the same attention he brings to everything else, his voice rising and falling with the rhythm of the prose. It is a novel about memory and forgiveness, about the ways we carry our past selves forward into whatever we become next. I am only half listening to the words, more interested in the sound of his voice, the way he pauses at the end of each paragraph to look up and make sure I am still with him. The air feels different now, lighter somehow, as if a door that had been sealed shut for years has finally been cracked open to let in fresh air. I think about the person I was just a month ago, sitting in that restaurant parking lot, paralyzed between staying and leaving, between the familiar ache of what I had always known and the terrifying possibility of what I had never dared to reach for. That version of myself feels like a stranger now, someone who accepted so little because he believed it was all he deserved. I do not judge him, that earlier self, but I do not miss him either. The transformation has been gradual but unmistakable, like watching a photograph develop in a darkroom, the image becoming clearer and more defined with each passing moment. Elliot finishes the chapter and closes the book, marking his place with a receipt from the bookstore where we bought it together last weekend. He asks if I want more wine, and when I nod, he refills both our glasses with the careful attention he brings to small gestures. This too feels remarkable, the way he notices when my glass is empty, the way he anticipates my needs without making me ask. On the counter behind him, my phone buzzes against the marble surface, the vibration sharp and insistent in the quiet room. I know without looking that it is another message from Nathaniel, part of the steady stream of texts that have continued despite my lack of response. They began as apologies, evolved into questions about my silence, and have recently taken on a tone of wounded bewilderment, as if he cannot understand why I am not answering his calls. For a moment, I consider checking the message, if only to see what new approach he has taken in his attempts to reconnect. But the impulse passes quickly, replaced by something that feels remarkably like indifference. Whatever Nathaniel needs tonight, whatever emergency or casual cruelty has prompted him to reach across the silence between us, can wait until tomorrow, or perhaps indefinitely. This is what freedom feels like, I realize. Not the dramatic liberation I once imagined, but this quiet ability to choose presence over absence, to prioritize the person sitting across from me over the ghost of someone who refused to fully materialize in my life. The phone continues to buzz, but I do not reach for it. Instead, I lean back in my chair and close my eyes, letting the sound of Elliot's breathing fill the room. When I open my eyes again, he is watching me with the gentle curiosity that first drew me to him. He asks if everything is all right, and I tell him yes, everything is exactly as it should be. The honesty of this statement surprises me. For the first time in longer than I can remember, I am not waiting for something to change or hoping for someone to become different. I am simply here, in this moment, with this person who sees me clearly and chooses to stay. The evening continues to unfold around us with the unhurried pace of real contentment. We wash the dishes together, moving around each other in the small kitchen with the easy choreography of two people learning to share space. Later, we will watch a film or read our separate books in comfortable silence, and eventually we will go to bed together, not with the desperate hunger that marked my nights with Nathaniel, but with the quiet intimacy of two people who have nothing to prove to each other. My phone has stopped buzzing now, and in the silence it leaves behind, I can hear all the sounds I had forgotten to notice. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic, the soft rustle of pages as Elliot opens his book again. These are the sounds of a life being lived fully, without apology or explanation, without the constant vigilance that comes from loving someone who cannot love you back. I look at the two wine glasses sitting between us, these simple objects that have become symbols of everything I never knew I was missing. They represent not just companionship, but the kind of love that expands rather than contracts, that invites rather than excludes, that asks me to become more myself rather than less. In choosing Elliot, I have chosen not just a person, but a way of being in the world. I have chosen to believe that I deserve to be loved completely, without reservation or condition. It is a choice I make new each day, and some days it still feels fragile, but tonight it feels as solid and real as the weight of his hand reaching across the table to touch mine. The sun has set completely now, and the kitchen is lit only by the lamp above the table, casting a warm circle of light around us while the rest of the world fades into darkness. We sit together in this pool of light, two people who have found each other across the vast uncertainty of existence. And for now, it is enough. More than enough. It is everything.